farmers should be on our side against intensification of farms. And in practice they are. But they get distracted by all this nonsense about vegan foods, which, again, vegan meat alternatives are less than 2% of the market for meat alternatives. Cultivated meat's not even here yet, and it's already banned in Italy because the farmers were convinced that that was the source of their problems. The source of farmers' problems is not alternative proteins. It's farm intensification. Let's take a look at this article on Bryant Research. How Big Ag Distracts Farmers and Destroys Their Jobs. This is by Charlotte Flores. Across Europe, farmers are protesting about the economic pressures they face. From tractors blocking roads in Germany and closing borders in Ukraine, to a multi-day siege in Paris, the farming crisis is impossible to ignore. While politicians and the meat lobby are rushing to blame meat alternatives, the evidence suggests that intensification, not meat alternatives, is the true cause of farming job losses. The factors driving these frustrations vary, but there are some common themes. Profit margins are getting slimmer, subsidy and payment programs continuously favour large agribusiness, cheap foreign imports are on the rise, and young people are less interested in going into or continuing farming. All of this adds additional pressure to what is already an extremely difficult job. Farmers are inherently susceptible to unpredictable factors like extreme weather, which has been exacerbated by climate change. Furthermore, they're burdened by physically grueling labour and a growing mental health crisis. The last thing farmers need is to have their grievances weaponised to advance the interests of large agribusiness. Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the really distasteful things about the farming lobbies in Europe really weaponising this weary sentiment among farmers so that they can aim it at meat alternatives, when they know full well farming jobs are disappearing not because of meat alternatives, because of farms getting intensified by these big food manufacturers. We're producing, as we'll see in a moment, more meat than ever, even though there are fewer farming jobs. Scapegoating meat alternatives. The debate surrounding farmer concerns has been co-opted by large agribusiness and directed towards meat alternatives. For example, Italy's attempt at a pro-farming bill promised to place a countrywide ban on cultivated meat. But cultivated meat has not even been approved yet for sale in Europe, and has displaced precisely zero demand for conventional meat to date. So this ban has now gone through. Italy have banned cultivated meat, and this was inspired by farming lobbies who took the opportunity to do this. And the reality is, farmers in Italy do have real problems. They really do. Their lives are getting harder, their pay is getting lower, but it's not to do with cultivated meat. None of their problems have been caused by cultivated meat. It's a complete distraction. Farmers' ire has been misdirected at meat alternatives, which still make up less than 2% of the total market for meat and alternatives. The narrative that the rise of veganism and alternative protein sources is to blame for farmer job losses is becoming increasingly prevalent. In April of 2022, Arla Foods, the largest British dairy company, launched a campaign to rally farmers, painting veganism as an extremist lobby that is going to lead to the collapse of the dairy industry. Furthermore, The Express published an article titled "Vegan Beef Threatens 1.5 Million Farming Jobs as Woke Ditch Meat to Save Planet." The problem is that these stories are misguided. There's evidence to show that meat and dairy reduction are not responsible for farmers' job losses. Now, here are the graphs which show this very clearly, and you can send this to anybody who talks about farmers' jobs in relation to veganism, and they will understand almost immediately. The real killer of farming jobs. The real killer of farming jobs is not falling demand for animal products, but intensification. The graphs below illustrate this well. As meat production increases, farming jobs decrease. This is a stark contrast to the view that farming jobs are linked to decreases in meat and dairy consumption. If this were the case, we would see farming jobs going down as meat production goes down. Of course, that's not what we see, right? We see pretty much opposite. Here we've got graphs for the UK, for the US, and we're looking at agricultural jobs in blue going down, down, down over time, right? So here's the situation in the UK. Agricultural employment 68% down, right? So there really are fewer farming jobs than there were, 70, 60 years ago? There really are fewer farming jobs than there were 60 years ago. Farmers do have real problems, and I'm sympathetic to them, I really am. It's not to do with people eating less meat, though. It's to do with factory farms. Okay, vegan products are not displacing farming jobs. Factory farms are displacing farming jobs. We've got graphs here for China, Brazil. Same story, really, right? We've got a decrease in agricultural employment, an increase in meat production over the same period. So clearly, the decrease in agricultural jobs is nothing to do with meat consumption going down, because meat consumption hasn't been going down during the time when agricultural jobs have been going down. In fact, countries that have been subject to extreme intensification have also seen the largest losses in small-scale farms. In the 1970s, the US Agricultural Secretary promoted large-scale farming with the attitude "get big or get out." 20 years later, in 1990, small and medium-sized farms accounted for nearly half of all agricultural production in the US. Nowadays, overall farm production continues shifting to larger operations, with small commercial farms on a steady long-term decline. So here's actually an area where vegans are very likely going to agree with some portion of the meat community, right? What I can only describe as like the meat community, right? The sort of rancher types, the regenerative people, farmers, really, right? Farmers should be on our side against intensification of farms. And in practice, they are. But they get distracted by all this nonsense about vegan foods, which, again, vegan meat alternatives are less than 2% of the market for meat and alternatives. Cultivated meat's not even here yet, and it's already banned in Italy because the farmers were convinced that that was the source of their problems. The source of farmers' problems is not alternative proteins. It's farm intensification. Over the past 20 years, USDA data shows a 50% increase of factory-farmed animals in the US. In the UK, this growth is also palpable, with over 1,099 US-style mega-farms operating as of 2021. Food production is going more towards these intensive factory farms. It's a real problem, and it's something that people like the Dublin Declaration people just completely ignore, right? They want to talk about agroecological systems and instances where livestock can be positive. They don't want to talk about the fact that the majority of livestock are coming from factory farms, and that's a trend that's increasing. We need to eat way less meat. It's important to acknowledge the role of concentration when considering farm size. It's sometimes misleadingly stated that most farms are small farms. It is sometimes misleadingly stated that most farms are small farms. But this does not imply that most animals are on small farms. For example, large farms in the US make up 3% of all farms, but account for 52% of total production value. This goes to show that even if a country really does have a higher proportion of small farms, that's not to say the majority of animals farmed in that country are reared on small farms. Of course, right? This is like saying most settlements in the UK are villages, as opposed to cities. But of course, most people live in cities, because there's way more people there than in the small farms. It's like saying we don't need to be concerned about wealth inequality because fewer than 1% of people are billionaires. Okay, but they've got all the money. This should serve as a warning to countries outside the US in the midst of intensification. The narrative positioning vegans and alternative proteins as primary threats to small-scale farmers is a strategic deflection from the real issues of monopolization and agricultural intensification. Ironically, those who vocally champion farmers simultaneously support policies and practices that exacerbate their marginalization. That's exactly the point. You have these lobbies like European Livestock Voice, like Calderetti, like the others. They're claiming to represent farmers, but by favouring these large agribusiness systems, they're actually undermining farmers. In promoting large-scale farming operations, these entities contribute to consolidating farming jobs into fewer hands and undermining the viability of small-scale farming. The struggles of small-scale farmers are effectively silenced, while public discourse is deliberately misdirected to food technologies which do not yet even exist, rather than focusing on the structural challenges within the agricultural sector that threaten their existence. Farmers deserve better. A just transition to a plant-based food system would create more than enough jobs to offset meat and dairy industry losses. Not only could more jobs be created through an uptake in plant-based eating, but the jobs created would likely be more desirable than those available in an industrialized animal agriculture. Meat processors recruit from vulnerable communities and often provide minimal worker protections, and intensification has changed the way these jobs are done. Workers are now forced to complete their tasks at speeds much faster than ever before, and farmers are pressured to scale up production in order to remain competitive. It is no wonder that many slaughterhouses have a staff turnover above 100%. Not only are the jobs in industrialized animal agriculture increasingly difficult, they're also increasingly undesirable. People just don't want to work in slaughterhouses, giving the meat processing industry abnormally high turnover rates. This has resulted in unconventional labour economics. Normally, a low supply of labour would cause wages to rise, but in simultaneously decreasing labour demand by intensifying and automating, wages have remained low for farmers. Attempts to scapegoat alternative proteins as the enemy of farmers are really a cover for the role that the rise of mega farms and the monopolisation of the meat and dairy industry plays in the job crisis. Whether intentional or not, this misplaced blame has provided ample ground for the unchecked monopolisation of the agricultural industry to the detriment of small farmers. It's time to focus on intensification, the real cause of so many of farmers' problems, and implement policies that are actually in the interest of small farmers, not mega farms. These farming lobbies always want to distract and deflect, talk about alternative proteins, talk about agroecological systems, talk about livestock in the developing world. They don't want to say anything about factory-farmed meat in developed countries, which is the vast majority of meat that is consumed. So if you come across people who are concerned about farming jobs, you should let them know. Farming jobs are getting worse. There are fewer of them than there used to be, but it's not because we're eating less meat. We're eating more meat than ever. Between 1961 and 2019, UK meat production was 87% up, but agricultural employment was 68% down. So meat production has almost doubled in the same time that agricultural employment has more than halved. Meat alternatives are not causing farming job losses. Factory farms are causing farming job losses. If you found this useful and you want to see more short videos debunking misinformation from the meat industry, you can follow me here at these links.